those of us who are parents or caregivers, we know that we want the best for our children. I don't know about you, but I often feel like I'm not quite getting it right. To launch season 5, I am privileged to have a guest who can support and help us to get it right, or at least improve how we're doing things. I was lucky to host and present today Dr. Vanessa Lapointe, psychologist, international speaker, parenting educator, author. Dr. Lapointe presents insight on families and children that we may not have thought about before, much of which sends us back to the mirror to look at what we as parents may be carrying and passing on to our children, obviously unintentionally. But the good news is that we have the power to address that and to make the best possible changes to create thriving, happy children. Today, I'm excited to present to you first guest of season 5, Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. It's an exciting day for two reasons. It's the launch of season 5 of the podcast, hard to believe, 5 seasons. And I am thrilled to have a timely and incredibly knowledgeable guest with us today. And that is Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. She is a parenting educator, a best-selling author, an international speaker. And she speaks the truth. And I think that is important nowadays. And this conversation will be quite timely. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Lapointe. I really appreciate you being here.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, the reason I mentioned timely, I've been reading a lot of articles lately, and one of the headlines was, "The kids are not okay." That's obviously a blanket statement, but I have 3 children myself, as most listeners know, 7, 5, and 11, and I can see how the kids cannot be okay in some places, stages. And North America, Canada, where I live, when it comes to a whole variety of elements, I feel that that statement is true. But before we get into your expertise, I want to just kind of set the stage for who Dr. Vanessa Lapointe is. And so I just wanted to know a little bit about your background, kind of where and how you grew up, and what brought you into this specialty of working with children and families.
So I actually grew up in rural Alberta. I'm as country as they come. And
Okay.
I started working as a teenager with kids in summer day camps and that sort of thing, coaching figure skating. And I decided that that's what I wanted. I wanted to be around that kind of energy and I wanted to work with children. And so fast forward a number of years, and 3 degrees later, I became a psychologist. And really, I started my career working directly with children, doing play therapy and counseling and other kinds of things. And over time, realized that that was probably at best, for the majority of those kids, just an expensive play date. Because the potency for shifting the reality of children, for shifting the environment around the child so that it's more conducive to their growth, the potency in all of that lies with the parent. The child has no control over that environment. So I shifted my career at that point to be really heavily focused on working with parents, with the occasional exception. And along the way, I became a mother. I have 2 boys who are 18 and 21 now. And I am, hashtag humbled every day to endeavor to walk my talk, which essentially is that if you want to raise children so that they get to grow up and actualize into the biggest, brightest version of themselves, then you need to spend the time to also grow yourself up. And so the work is really twofold. It's focused on the environment that the parent is creating and where that environment comes from inside of them.
Right. It's interesting that you say that. I had my daughter at an appointment this week. She was struggling with some things that we just wanted to get some advice on. And the pediatrician's advice actually came back to my husband and I, and not to my daughter, which is consistent with what you're saying, because it makes sense. The one with the maturity and ability to control the situation, the dynamic of the home. kind of has more of the responsibility to really look inwards. As most listeners know, my 7-year-old son has ADHD. He's an amazing child. He's made just the way he's supposed to be, but he needs a different approach than some other children may, especially compared to my other two children. And there's a lot of discussion about kind of spike in ADHD and neurodiverse cases. And I'm wondering if this is something that you've seen and that you believe is happening, or are we just noticing it more? Are we overdiagnosing it? What is your perspective on this?
I certainly have seen that same spike. I think part of it is that we know more, and so we are diagnosing more. And there probably were children and adults historically who did have ADHD but did not know that. There are also, though, there are two schools of thought in terms of where that ADHD piece comes from. And one of those is to borrow heavily from the biomedical model and to understand it as a difference in terms of brain development. Notably, the National Institute of Mental Health has put out data to suggest that a lot of children who get diagnosed with ADHD will eventually, at the brain level, air quotes, outgrow that, in that the structures thought to be implicated in ADHD do eventually reach the same size and the same, maturational completion as in children that do not have ADHD. And then the challenge becomes that they become adults who are still symptomatic. And the thinking is that symptom experience in adulthood is actually more likely to be anxiety as a result of how poorly they were treated as children for having had ADHD. So when you borrow from the biomedical side, the thinking would be that there are certain brain structures that are just developing on a different timeline and in a different way than in children that do not have ADHD. There are also, though, and I think this is worth discussion, is another view that suggests that ADHD, in the way that we are seeing it currently, is not entirely the result of biological mechanisms, that it is an intersection between how humans are meant to grow and the kind of environment they are now growing in, and that environment is not conducive to their healthiest growth. And so there's always going to be sort of those two sides to that coin. And from a place of intervention, and certainly as a parent from a place of support, you'll want to make sure that you are deeply considering both sides.
Yes. And when you say that environment that kind of nurtures the best growth, that would include in utero, correct? Perhaps?
Yes. Yeah, right from the jump. So we know, there's all sorts of things about in utero. There's the mental set of the mind. And a lot of people will look at things like, was this child invited? What were the circumstances around conception? What was the experience that the mother was having or that the two parents were having whilst the child was in utero? But we also know, similar to the last answer, there's sort of a psychosocial side to that, but there's also a biomedical side that, if a mother is very stressed herself, and I don't know if you've looked around the world today, but it largely feels like a dumpster fire most days, that if the mother is very stressed during pregnancy, then the impact of the cortisol release will be significant, and that could be part of what the child experiences. So it is right from the get-go, not from when they're delivered, but from the point of conception that we're thinking about how do we best ensure we've done everything we can within ourselves, emotionally speaking, and within the environment, structurally speaking, to make sure our kids get the best shot.
Wow. So this really does lie on taking care of oneself before, during, and throughout a child's life.
Absolutely. And coming back to that over and over and over again, there's no such thing as a straight line, as I'm sure anybody who's experienced child raising would tell you, that there are going to be, stops and starts and ups and downs. And sometimes you'll go through an age or a stage where you're feeling like this is getting very settled. And then all of a sudden, you're in the tween years and you're pulling your hair out because this kid thinks that you're the worst parent that's ever parented in the history of all parents. And
yes, I've heard that one.
Same girl. And then you're right back into a growth phase. And so, that's how life goes. And we are not here to live perfection, but we are here to fail better next time.
So, Dr. Lapointe, my question for you then is, I guess, what is the best way to prepare for a child before, if a couple's planning on having a baby, they have this knowledge, or perhaps they've learned that the mother is pregnant. What's the best way to prepare and care for that mother and for that dynamic between mother and father, so that if these and I think there's a lot of sense to that, pieces actually really do affect the child from the get-go, that it's set up for success from the beginning, as best as possible, of course.
I think the number one way that you can best prepare for all of that is to begin to very seriously look at what your childhood was like. And
Right.
not from the perspective of pointing fingers of blame and shame at your own parents, rather from the perspective of understanding where it is that you have come from so that you can make sense of where it is that you are now and where it is that you are heading towards. We are a byproduct of the environment that we were raised in. So that environment created our minds. And then we grow up, at least in form, and become adults. And that mind is now creating the environment all around us. And in that environment, our children will grow. And so you really want to figure out, how did I end up with this mind? Where is it that I have come from? What is it foundationally that flowed into me and not only wrote the messages on my heart that now govern the way that I live my life, but also that influenced the neural architecture of my own brain? And so taking that retrospective look at where you've come from, your own experience as a child, I think is probably one of the most powerful ways you can begin to understand what it is that you want to do and be as a parent.
Wow. Wow. So our children really force us to look at ourselves, to do work that we probably should have been doing in the first place.
They will hand it to you on a silver platter and it will bring you to your knees.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, and I hadn't planned on asking you this question, but we've kind of come to it. Do you tend to have more pushback in your work from fathers? Because I know men tend to be more hesitant to look there and to go into those places where might not be as comfortable on the mental health side.
Yes, and the way that we socialize our little boys is part of what drives them to become fathers who are challenged to look inside for the answers that they seek. What I witness in my work, even if I look at my social media following of about like 1 million people, they're 97% women. And so we know
Right.
still that in terms of gender roles and assignment of responsibility, that mothers often are the ones that are, seeking out this kind of information. And to be fair, we have a long history of excluding dads from this world.
Yeah.
From how we market things to how we brand things, none of that's been historically very friendly for dads. What I do see is that the dads that I often end up working with, they're what I call drag-alongers, where
Yeah.
their wife or the mother of their children has come to the work and has dragged the dad along. Sometimes we see dads, most parents don't call me when everything's going really well. Most of the parents that I'm working with are in crisis on one level or another, or, are concerned about something with their children that they're really working to sort out. If I do have a dad who comes to me directly and isn't a drag-alonger, what I witness is that they're usually in a much more dire straits kind of situation than when their wives come along in the first place. And so I think, it's challenging for any of us to crack open the vault and look inside and make sense of what it is that we see. And for our men who were, never allowed to be soft and be sensitive and have access to their feelings, because I'll give you something to cry about. I
Hmm.
think it's even harder. And hopefully, the way that we are raising this generation will see that shift going forward.
Yeah. Wow. That's really great insight. My husband, who's also the producer for this podcast, I'm sure he won't mind me sharing, he's from the Dominican Republic. So in that Latin American culture, that kind of machismo way of approaching things is, the answer to, I think I have depression is, well, stop having it then. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Go for a walk,
Suck it up,
stop.
Buttercup.
Exactly, exactly. So there is a documentary that you're currently traveling across Canada and the world promoting, and it's coming to British Columbia. It's called Seen the Film, and it's an important conversation about parenting, childhood, healing, and hope. It's being screened for the first time in BC on September 18th in Surrey, and it's presented by Options Community Services. A lot of what we're speaking to today, I know, is incorporated into the film, although with the detail, a lot more detail and perspective, and I'm sure case studies and such. I've spoken to you about the film, but I want to chat just for a second about traumas that children experience in different stages of their life. Parents have, as you mentioned, experienced traumas. This is something that then becomes often passed down. Can you speak a little bit to kind of breaking that cycle? And also, I would imagine that parents kind of become a bit defensive when the answer is actually, this is something that you really need to have a look at within you. Is there a lot of defensiveness that comes when that is your feedback and advice? And also, how do we break this generational passing along of either small, medium, large traumas, however you want to describe them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to swallow that pill of, "Oh, you mean this is me?" And you have to, when you have a finger pointing at someone else, you always have three fingers pointing back at you. So it's about taking that finger back and making sure that you are doing everything that you can be to find a way to come forward. And what I always say to parents is, it's not your fault. It's not like you were born into this life and you were like, yeah, hook me up with that program and give me that wound and make me have that family history, et cetera, et cetera. It's
Yeah.
just what happens. We're all innocent in the experience that we come into when we're born into our lives as human beings. And the way that I like to reframe that for parents is like, thank God it's you, because
Mm-hmm.
if it's you, then you have all the power. Then you can feel very empowered that you can really shift and move and change things. If it was something out there, then you don't have any power. You have to go chase after it and figure out how to make it happen in a different way. And so, yeah, it's going to come back to you, but not because you're a rotten parent, rather because you're an attuned and insightful parent and you want the best for your child. And so, it can be a daunting thing to take that on. And when we do, it's a very freeing thing. There's no judgment in any of that. There's just potential and opportunity.
Yeah, wow. Yes, I can see why you are fabulous at your job because you just made me feel a lot less guilty about some of the things I've passed on to my children unintentionally.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and I'm aware. It's interesting because even after you become aware, you catch yourself in certain moments, and then you have to backpedal and realize, okay, here where I am and how I can rectify it in this moment. I want to just switch a little bit here to this dynamic that children have with screens, and not only with the number of hours using them, but the content in which they're consuming. We're hearing a lot about rapid dopamine release, this becoming kind of so much of an issue that it's almost like an addiction that a child is having to detox from when they're on screens for long periods of time and then consuming this rapid fire content and then having to be pulled away from it. We struggle. I know parents do their very best. I know sometimes the screen is, even when you work from home, I do, and you can't be there every second. You put all the parental controls you can. What are your thoughts on the screen dynamic and any advice for parents out there just really feeling like they're hitting their heads against the wall with screens?
Well, I would say first off, you're all in real good company. So if you're feeling like secretly very ashamed of how much time your kid is on screens or whatever it is, so too is everybody else. They're just not, courageous enough to admit that publicly.
Right.
It's an interesting thing because the technology revolution came on very quickly. So it's not like we had 200 or 300 years, as we have in other revolutions, to really consider ethically and otherwise what was going to be the impact of all of this. And instead, what has happened is we're seeing the impact and we're thinking, snap, like we need to hurry scurry and figure out how we're going to get ahead of all of this. To put it into context, my eldest son, who's now 21, was born the same year that Facebook was created. So in his lifetime, if you can imagine the like Facebook, which is now, like all the old people use Facebook, and there's so many other platforms that have come along, and you combine that with the gaming world that is also really cracked open, has become sort
Yes.
of an entirely different beast than it was 21 years ago. Like, no wonder parents are struggling with what to do about that. It's been like mock speed rapid fire, and even the people who are meant to know, the so-called experts, don't really know what we're meant to be doing about this and how to be responding. I think the challenges and why it's become such a big issue have to do partly with those reward circuits and how everything is affected by the experience of being online. And
Yeah.
overlaying all of that, the bigger issue is that it has shifted how we are handling ourselves as social beings. And so we are a social species. We are meant to be in contact and closeness with one another. And we tend to organize our lives and everything about our lives around our underlying, all consuming, driving need to be in contact, closeness, and connection with one another. And so we don't use social media just to keep up with the news and the experiences of the day. We're using social media to get a relational hit, every like, every follow, those kinds of things. Or if you look at your kids who are gaming, there's something about the collective experience of gaming. Most kids now game online in communities with other people, or there's some kind of a social element to the gaming world. And that makes it very sticky. And problematically, as humans, like, we were meant to look into the whites of each other's eyes and to have real, concrete, tangible experiences of human connection. And you just don't get that same experience when you're on the two-dimensional world of screens, whether it be social media or the gaming community. And the problem with that is that when you get those ready hits of social connection through those other means, it's kind of like snacking on brownies and chocolate bars and potato chips all day long. And then your parents come along and invite you to feast at their table, and you're like, nah, I'm good, thanks. So it sort of
Yeah.
ruins us for the actual connection that we need. And then we're off to the races. And I do think that there's a lot behind what we are, referring to as the mental health crisis. I think part of it comes down to that experience of screens and how it creates a disruption in our ability to connect with one another in meaningful ways.
Yes, definitely. I notice a change in my son when he's been at his land-based school playing, in connection with other students with no screens versus his behavior, personality, mood, demeanor when he's been on a screen that I pass sometimes, Dr. Lapointe, and it sounds like slot machines at a casino. Do you know what I mean? It's very rewarding in that sense, which is scary. But you're so right about how quickly this has all happened. I wanted to ask you if you feel. I mean, is it true? Do you think that some children are really more empathic than others? Clearly, some are more sensitive, and there's reasons for that. My children are incredibly sensitive and empathic, and so if I am upset, I cannot hide it. So I actually need to leave the home. And I don't mean move out of the home. I mean, I need to go for a walk or, because they pick up on it in a snap and it really upsets them. And I'm just wondering this, are children more prone to this? And if so, when we're in those states where, and everyone's going to have those days where they're not their best as a parent, how do we keep that from affecting our children and really, they need some realities, but how do we keep that from really affecting and upsetting them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can protect all children from all of our emotions all of the time. And there is a place for our children to witness the humanity that lives inside of us. The key, though, is to ensure as a parent that you are taking full responsibility for your emotion and that you remember your role inside the context of the parent-child connection. So your children are looking to you as the parent to kind of have your poop in a group. You have to be able to manage your emotions and regulate and all of those kinds of things. And if you're not in control, if you're not, maybe let's substitute the word control with the word in charge. If you're not in charge, then your children are going to have this sort of feeling of okay, but who is? And what we don't want is for the child to feel like they need to step into the lead. Because if you think it's tricky to raise children, you ain't seen nothing until you try to raise a kid who thinks they're in the lead of you. So
Right.
how to do that then is to own your experience. You know what, honey, I'm having a really rough day today. And sometimes that happens. And so everything's good. You're good and I'm good. And the two of us together, we're good. I'm going to go for a walk. and I'm going to take some big old deep breaths and I'm going to come on back. And here's what we're having for dinner. So you just kind of own that.
Right.
I've canceled families through divorce and death and different kinds of grief. And parents will say, like, I just can't stop crying. I'm always crying. And I'm really worried that my child is going to be very distressed by the fact that I'm so upset by this. And the response is always just own it. Like, your job as a parent is to collect your own tears, not to look to your child to do that, whilst also collecting their tears. You can say, yeah, I'm really sad right now. You can say, I'm
Yeah.
really sad right now, and I'm going to take care of that the same way that I take care of you when you're sad. So they don't feel like they have to carry it.
Right. That's great. That's great. Okay. I'm a crier, and I explain to my kids, I cry when I'm happy. I cry when I'm sad. And I'm okay. Because that's the truth. And, but that's a really a good way to look at it. Because I've often wondered that the effect that my tears in times of even in happiness have affected them. In your practice, in your work, Dr. Lapointe, what are we've talked about various challenges, but are there others that are very common that you're really seeing, that you're facing much more so than you did, say, 10 years ago with families and children?
Yeah, I think the shift, if you will, or the trend in terms of what it is that I'm seeing. I see a lot of parents who are really well intentioned, who are reading all the books and doing all the Google searches and desperately trying to show up and make it happen. And maybe because of that, or alongside that, I am seeing parents today. I just feel like the degree of overwhelm is unparalleled, and it has been exponential in how it has grown over the last several years. So parents today, they're beautifully intentioned, and they're actually really aware compared to when I started my career 20 plus years ago, and they're really overwhelmed. There's a lot of information. They're at the end of a fire hose trying to make sense of all of that information that's coming at them. And because they feel overwhelmed in the sea of information, I think it makes it challenging for them to find their way and to know kind of what to listen to and what to ignore.
And how to prioritize what needs to be managed. I just want to ask you about schools. We've had a very, very challenging situation with the public school system, unfortunately, especially with our middle child with ADHD, a lot of bullying. In the first 2 years, he experienced bullying that is beyond what I could accept, and we actually needed to move to a different municipality. It broke my heart, and if it broke mine, I imagine it broke his twice as much. And I'm wondering, as I mentioned, he's now at an outdoor-based learning. It's actually an Indigenous-led school as a part of the public school system in Surrey. It's a great school. My daughter's at a Christian school starting kindergarten. She's loving it, but we know just because it's a Christian school, it's not going to be a perfect school. Do you hear about a lot of these kind of what I say dangers, but I mean by that is emotional, psychological dangers in the school system, elementary and high school, mostly related to kind of things like bullying and one's well-being amongst peers within the school system?
Yeah, I think we see lots of that for sure. And the challenges become, interpersonal challenges between children who, by the way, are not really meant to be, running in big packs of same-aged peers without a lot of involvement or intervention. That's not in the best interest of our children. If you look historically at how we've always raised children, it's always been inside mixed age groups in the context of the village with lots of grown-ups around and lots of older kids around. And so that's a very different experience than what many of our children have, where they go into these, 25 plus kids of all the same age that they spend all day long with for 10 months out of the year. That's a really different experience than humans of generations past. And interpersonally, the dynamic is challenging between children because they're not meant to live that way. They're not meant to be in these big packs of same-age kids, but also there are interpersonal dynamics between teachers and children that can become challenging as well. And I see that very gently because I know so many educators who are just angels on earth. You know, they are experts at their craft. They are doing the most sacred work of all. They spent
Yes.
19,000 hours with our children from kindergarten through to the end of 12th grade. And so they are magic. And in the same way that parents often struggle to understand their children's behavior and to not vilify the child for the behavior, particularly when that behavior flows from some other underlying kind of thing like ADHD or anxiety, we as parents can really struggle, and we can get behaviorist and become punishing to our children because of how they're presenting. Teachers are just humans, and they can have the same experience as well. And if we look at the advent of the formal bricks and mortar school system, no part of that originally was intended to be created for the health and well-being of children. The formal school system came around for the health and well-being of the almighty dollar, to make
Right.
countries competitive on the economic world stage. And so, I mean, that time is not this time. We do see that educational systems on the whole are really endeavoring to shift towards something that's more child-centered, to make sure that they are needs-driven, and so that they're able to respond to the needs of each and every child, not just the collective needs of the group. And, you know, that pendulum swing is going to be decades in the making. And so oftentimes I end up in conversation with families about whether or not school is meant for their child, school in
Right.
the traditional bricks and mortar sense. My own children went to bricks and mortar schools. My one son, you know, happily bounced along. We had both private school experience and public school experience, and he's what I call a dandelion kid. Like, he just kind of rolls with the punches and comes out flourishing on the other side no matter what. My other son had devastating experiences inside the walls of one of the schools that he attended.
Yeah.
The kind of devastating experience that, you know, had I left him there, I don't know that he would have survived his adolescence. Like, it was awful for him. And so I think as parents, we have to be willing to get real and get fierce, and to change that environment if it is not conducive to the growth of our child.
Yeah. Parents, wow, parents are facing a lot. I think I'm going to switch up a question to conclude here, just based on what you've shared, Dr. Lapointe. I think all of this is incredibly valuable. I mean, beyond for any parent. I highly encourage you to see the screening of the film Scene when it comes to Surrey on the 18th of September. But what would be your first piece of advice? Couples, so parents, maybe going in and checking in with a family therapist counselor.
I mean, in an ideal world, if you can have both of you, whether you're parenting together or parenting apart under different roofs, in an ideal world, that you would both be willing to come in and have those conversations. And I think we all can benefit from that. You know, I don't think it's reserved for the parents that have children who are neurodivergent or have other kinds of things going on. I think every single one of us, we're all on the journey of being human. And what a wonderful thing to, you know, have a coach in your corner that's going to help you out with how that journey is playing out. And if it is not possible, if there's only one parent, and that's often what I end up witnessing, is that there's one parent who's willing to come to the table. Well, the good news is that the resilience literature is very clear. It only takes one. And yes, your children may have to heal from the experiences of the other parent, how they have come into their child raising dynamic. But the point being, they will be able to heal from that if they have at least one parent who shows up, who grows themselves up, who believes the sun rises and sets on their child, and who, you know, fills that child up with the ultimate belief that they are worthy, and that they are magic, and that they can do, you know, whatever it is they set their mind to.
Amazing. Wow. I look forward to seeing the screening. I will be there. Thank you so much. Dr. Lapointe, I always give guests an opportunity at the end of the episode. If there's a nonprofit that you very much support that you'd like to mention, would love to hear about that and link to that below the episode when it streams.
You know, I would love to just highlight Options and their service to community. I have been walking alongside them professionally for many years now. I've done a lot of different events to support different folks inside the various programming that they offer, but I also benefited from their services as a mom when I had very young children, and found my community and found my village through some of what it is that they are creating out in the world. I took my boys to, you know, Mother Goose play groups where we did nursery rhymes and all sorts of things together. And so I just can't sing their praises enough. And I love to support them every opportunity that I get.
Wonderful, amazing. I will link to them below. Thank you so much, Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. Her wait list, I'm sure, is far longer. Are you still counseling, Dr.
I am
Lapointe?
still practicing. I've
Yes.
retired as a licensed psychologist for the reasons that I can't actually support people globally if I'm
Yes.
carrying a psych license. And so I've let that go, and I have a global parent support program. So I am actively every day still working with families around the world to make sure that their kids get every opportunity possible to become who it is that they are meant to be.
Amazing. Well, how fortunate we are to hear from you today, Dr. Lapointe, as such an expert, parenting educator, best-selling author, international speaker. More importantly, you seem to get it. And I could talk to you for hours, and I will not do that to you, but I could and ask you a million questions. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I so appreciate it.
Amazing. Such a pleasure to be on with you. Thanks for having me. Be kind and truly connect. You are listening to Rachel Bexton Connect.